the high cost of computing. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
The Amstrad CPC was perfect and bears no criticism.
Mountains come out of the sky. Legendary artist Roger Dean talks about his work with Tetris, Psygnosis, and more.
They cost how much? We look at the price of collecting in the context of adjusting for inflation.
And Lego Game Boy news, along with classic versions of Windows making a comeback, all coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 11th of October, 2025.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, gentlemen. Hello, audience. Hello, toddlers. Oh, hello, Johnny.
Dave.
How are you all? I understand, Chris, you've been itching to speak about something. One of our friends at the Retro Hour.
Our friends, our alter egos. Yes, we're just, being traditionally late by getting late on the news. They celebrated their 500th episode, So congratulations to Dan, Ravi, and Joe for all the hard work you put in over the years. It's a fantastic podcast. And 500 episodes, that's a lot of effort. We know what it's like. So well done.
And they're changing it, though. They're mixing it up, aren't they?
That's right. So they are, because their podcast, even if you watched it on YouTube, it was just a static graphic. So you still just listen to it, which is great because then you can do it in the background at work and stuff like that. But now they've switched it up, and guess what? They're doing video. Not dissimilar to another podcast, funnily enough. Let's face it, there's lots of us that do it this way out there. So it's fantastic. I really like it because I'm a visual person. And I don't think I'd ever knowingly seen Joe's face before. And you know how you create a picture in your head based on a voice of what somebody should look like? So that was quite, that's what he looks like. I thought he'd have less facial hair. Sorry, Joe. But I've met Dan and Ravi, obviously, and seen their channels.
I think Joe is quite hairy. Yeah.
He is very, So, whereas I thought he'd have less. So, it was quite funny. Just little things like that. You go, oh, okay. And for a minute, for a while, just for a couple of seconds, it almost felt like it was out of sync because my brain was going, the voice does not match the face. But that was just me. Fantastic. It's good stuff, though. Nice, very nice format.
Yeah, congratulations to them all. Fantastic podcast. Amazing interviews, and it's the interviews I think are the best bit. They've so many amazing interviews. Well, 500 in fact. That's how many they've got.
Yeah.
Anyway, no interviews with us this week.
Yeah. But I will be on their episode that comes out the Friday after this one. So obviously they were looking for people who had experience talking to a couple of UK natives about retro technology for an hour. And they said, hey, why don't you come on? So.
Fantastic.
Well, I look forward to listening to you on that, Jason. Right, let's get wired into this week's content. The second top submission this week at the time of looking is a video titled, Was the Amstrad CPC Really Rubbish? It's a video from a channel I've not watched before, in fact I've not heard of before, called Retro Games. It's about 3 years old, this channel, and he seems to be doing quite well. And he starts off with a bit of an apology for not covering the CPC and a bit of an admission that he's never really paid much attention to it. And I can kind of get that just because of the way it came out. It came out after the Spectrum and the Commodore 64. And he does it. He does this video by looking at issue 1 of Amtix magazine. Not Antics, but Amtix magazine from 1985, which is the year after the CPC came out. So things were still new for it then. And I actually quite enjoyed this video. Some people didn't seem to like it, but I quite enjoyed the video. He didn't fall into the trap of just retelling the same CPC story most of us have heard before. He gets right into talking just about the games and the magazine and so on. And I do enjoy people going through magazines and video, and I prefer when they're prepared a bit. It's not just straight to the camera, don't know what they're going to see. And he had obviously prepared just enough. So by the time I watched this, producer Duncan had already watched it. And he left a comment saying he wasn't too impressed with the guy's conclusions. And I get that. I don't agree with the guy's conclusions. But he was not an Amstrad CPC guy. And he's going to it for the first time in 2025. So he's not going to get blown away by next-gen graphics on it. And if you are comparing CPC games to Spectrum, which is what he wanted to do, you're not only going to be looking at typically Spectrum AIM games, but you're going to be looking at ports and the way it worked with porting from the Spectrum to the Amstrad. It was very difficult to do a port from a Spectrum to the Amstrad unless you just did a lazy port. There wasn't really much of a middle ground between a lazy port and doing a CPC game, because if you did a CPC game from scratch, you likely used a different video mode, a really colourful one, whereas most of the time the Spectrum ones went for a 4-colour mode, and they end up being a little bit slower as well. So if you compare Spectrum and Amstrad games, unless they were built from the ground up on the Amstrad, they don't quite look so good. And just to be quick with the Spectrum superpower, rather than a colour for every pixel on the screen, so every pixel on the screen having its own individual colour, the Spectrum had an 8x8 block with a colour assigned to the whole block, meaning it could do things faster and with less memory, and that's, of course, what also covered colour clash. And the CPC doesn't have that, so if you take a game with that across the CPC, you then just have to assign colours individually, and that you then end up with a slower game. So I don't actually think it matters quite so much if a game is slower side by side on the Spectrum versus the CPC. I don't think that matters so much if you can see a difference side by side, because that's not how you play the games. You sit down, you play the game, and you only look at one screen. And if it's fast enough that enjoyable, then it's fine. Ultimately, he ends up not being convinced by the CPC, which is fine, but I still love mine, and I disagree with him. I think my CPC was fantastic. I'm glad to see he did play a very early CPC classic called Sorcery Plus. It's one of the first games that really made the CPC stand out, so it does do things. It's made for the CPC from the ground up, so it's wonderfully colourful, it's nice and fast, and it's fun to play. And I don't want us to bash this video, and I don't want our listeners to get the wrong idea. The guy doing the video, Jace, was nice about it all. He wasn't sitting there getting angry. He wasn't doing it in a confrontational way. He wasn't doing it the angry video nerd type thing. It was fun, and he was enjoying it. And I don't think I mind that he's not converted by the end. But what I want to ask you guys, though, isn't really about the content of this video. Link in the show notes, of course. What I want to ask you about is, what's your platform that nobody else likes? Obviously not the Amiga or the C64, because they're both extremely well liked and nobody dismisses them as meaningless. But do you have a platform that you think it's put into the also ran category a little unfairly? Chris?
That's really interesting. Before I jump on to answer your actual question, I do want to chime in on the CPC, because I only saw it briefly in the 80s, and I didn't pay it that much attention as well. And it's only when I saw one running at a PORG meet in 2020, and it was playing Barbarian, and I was confused because at first glance it was like, hang on, isn't that the Amiga port? So I thought maybe it was a modded, because that's how good it is, right? When it does a game well, it looks fantastic and it plays fantastic. So a lot of respect from me for the Amstrad CPC. My system of choice, to answer your question, though, would be my beloved Philips VideoPack G7000, or the Magnavox Odyssey 2 in the States. And it's not that it's a system that people hate, but it certainly, I think, lives in the shadows of the more common Atari VCS/2600. And that's, for me, why I love that system so much. Yes, that is partly due to nostalgia, because it was the first system our family owned. That was the first games console we had. But I think it's also a really great system. It has some really standout games and some quite impressive add-ons as well, like the speech module. So, yeah, it's not a system a lot of people get into and talk about, and I think it's worth investigating. Yep.
If only we could insert a graphic with the standard Odyssey, question mark display at the bottom of seemingly every screen, unless you were a programmer clever enough to turn that off. Yeah, obviously no real experience with CPCs in the flesh here. I think you have to get into the 90s and early 2000s before I can start identifying like what are my also ran platforms. I've talked about really loving the Scion 3 platform. I'm one of the few people who will at least defend Windows CE's right to exist. It wasn't my favorite or anything, but I didn't hate it the way so many people did. I really liked the SanDisk Sansa portable media players. I thought those were really nice, both stock firmware and especially the Rockbox modded firmware. Those are really cool. And obviously, smartphones kind of wipe the floor with any need for those kinds of things. Like in terms of as 80s platforms go, I don't really have one because like I guess maybe the IBM PC Junior, which I only knew was a bad computer because people told you it was bad. My neighbors had one, and that was my first DOS machine. And they did have a real keyboard. It was not the original nasty chiclet one. It was actually a fairly decent, infrared wireless keyboard that worked pretty well. I enjoyed playing, King's Quest 1 and 2, with the neighbors. It had decent graphics. It was fun to work on. So probably PC Junior with honorable mention in there. I've liked what I've seen of the MSX, which didn't really have much of a presence in the US, but you'll see import machines and things like that. So conceptually MSX, in real world, I guess probably PC Junior would be the one that I'll stand up for.
Going back to the CPC though, if you've never gone near one and you do want to explore the library, here are my suggestions for kind of action arcadey games. Head Over Heels, Sorcery Plus, Barbarian, Prince of Persia, remember last week talking about it, and the Chase HQ conversion is really good. But for me, by the time I was moving on from the CPC to the Atari ST, I wasn't playing so much of that type of game. I was playing the odd text adventure, but also strategy and one single RPG, The Bard's Tale, which thankfully the only game we got that was an RPG was a really good one. Also, The Lords of Midnight, Laser Squad, and Rebel Star are great in the CPC, and so is Elite. It's fantastic on it too. I asked Duncan as well. Duncan says his favourites are Chase HQ, Wek Le Mans. He loved the Dizzy series, particularly when they added the rest of the Yokefolk characters. Silkworm was a great favourite, and he also spent a lot of time on Codemasters Grand Prix Simulator. Simple but great fun. And the port of Buggy Boy was decent too.
Is Wek Le Mans what became Burn Rubber on the Amstrad GX? I think so. Whatever it was. Yeah.
I think I got an upgrade to Burn Rubber, which is the pack-in cartridge for the GX 4000. I don't need to talk about the GX 4000. Everybody's heard of that one. It's the most famous console in the world. Maybe not. But finally, if the idea of comparing 8-bit games does interest you, then you will love the special episodes of 8-Bit Wars that were on the amazing podcast Retro Asylum. They did them over a period of 10 years. They've done them. Fantastic episodes, a lot of fun. People getting into the spirit of defending their platform just for entertainment. Fantastic. So if you're looking for those, it's episode 102, 296, 323 and 343 of Retro Asylum podcast if you want to know more about 8-bit platform wars, which is not quite what the video link goes at, but it's getting into the kind of the comparison between the platforms. We are sponsored this week by Pixel Addict magazine. Pixel Addict magazine is Britain's best-selling tech history magazine. That's what they're saying now. Tech history. Never heard that phrase before. I like it. And the current issue is that wonderful vector image of the classic Casio watch in lovely red lead. Lots of stuff in the issue. They've got something about the rare Fujitsu FM7 dual CPU from 1982 system. That's is that even an also ran? Sega Game Gear RPG top picks. There's more in there as well. Retcon 2025 show report. Lots to read in Pixel Addict magazine. And if you wanted to get Pixel Addict magazine, Jason, what would you do?
You would go to addict.media, where you can also see some of the other publications that the Addict folks put out. They do one-off specials like Amstrad Addict.
Nice.
Dave, do you have any idea how Amtix compares to the Amstrad Addict special?
Well, they relaunched Amtix.
Did they?
Yeah, they relaunched it a few years ago, and it ran 12 issues and then sadly passed away. Amtix was not the same as the Pixel Addict special. The Pixel Addict special was a little bit... I'm trying to express what the difference was. It's just all those years have passed meant it was a different experience entirely. I really enjoyed the special that the Addict team put out.
Yeah, those platform-specific specials they've done. I think they've done Atari 8-bit, I think the Amstrad Addict. So, yeah, always interesting stuff coming out from the folks at Addict Media.
Yeah, addict.media. If you want it physical or you want it in a PDF. Thank you for sponsoring us.
Thank you. So No Software 3721, or 3720, you get the idea. He posted a story for all of us who sit at the surprisingly large Venn diagram intersection between classic gaming and progressive rock. It's an interview with Roger Dean, conducted by Joachim Froholt of the spillhistory.no site. So Roger Dean is a painter with a distinctive, what we'd call now a fantasy style that defined a whole generation of music album covers in the 1970s, and then kind of did it again in the 1980s. So Dean was the artist for what I would call the peak 70s period of the band Yes, as well as some of its offshoots, including but not limited to the 1980s supergroup Asia. He crafted the original Virgin Records logo, as well as the logo for legendary publisher Psygnosis. So the interviewer notes that he was pleasantly surprised that Dean, who is still alive and kicking at the age of 81, by the way, surprised that Dean was willing to engage in his games career in so much detail. And Dean relates in the interview how the young entrepreneurs of the home video game scene reached out to him because, as he readily acknowledges, he was a pretty big deal. As he puts it in the article, on top of him being, totally inescapable at both ends of the alphabet in a record store, A, he's under Asia, Y, he's under Yes. He says, during the 70s, my posters, books, calendars, etc., sold about 65 million copies, and by the mid-80s, we'd passed 100 million sales. So, for people like Hank Rogers and Psygnosis founder Jonathan Ellis, to seek out his work seemed natural enough. And this is something you still see today, by the way. Pay attention to how the music that's used to advertise cars or clothes or food and so forth, listen to how it changes over time, because you can tell either how old the marketers are who are making the decisions, because they tend to reach for things that made a big impact on them when they were teenagers, or they're reaching for things that they think the target audience had a connection to in their teenage years. And speaking of Tetris entrepreneur Hank Rogers, I think the fact that Roger Dean did the Tetris logo that they used from 1997 for 20 plus years, I think this is a fact that my brain refuses to absorb, because I'm sure I've heard this before, but every time I see it, it's like, oh, that's a surprise. I didn't know that. And then I realized I did know that. So the interview goes in depth on a number of historical topics that date back 40 years or more in Roger Dean's artistic career. So as happens in these cases, not everything has a super tidy answer, as even he is not quite sure how or why he came up with the idea of incorporating an owl in the iconic Psygnosis logo. So for you two guys, how did you first connect with Roger Dean's art? Was it album covers? Was it calendars? Was it the Psygnosis boxes? Where'd you first connect in?
So for me, it was Psygnosis games, but not the cover art. It was the rendition of the cover art in the game. And that's because of the way in which I got hold of the games meant I didn't see the cover art. Yeah. I don't think I've ever listened to a Yes album, but I should. I mean, I like the idea of progressive rock. I've never got into it. I do like a bit of progressive metal. I like a bit of Iron Maiden. And it's I like to listen to an Iron Maiden album rather than the earlier songs. So I like the idea of sitting down to listen to progressive rock. I've never done it. I don't know if I get into it. But I understand the idea of it. So I guess Roger Dean is owner of some lovely art.
Whoa.
There you go. My favourite, though, and it's got me worried now, the favourite is this, The Killing Game Show. That's my favourite Psygnosis art, and the intro for it is great. If you look really closely, it's an eye. There's a reflection in the eye of a landscape with a skull for a moon. And now it's got me worried that Roger Dean didn't do that one. And I didn't check that Roger Dean did that one. And it might be an absolute idiot if I've picked one that Roger Dean didn't do.
That's funny, actually, because I was going to say pteropods. And then in a brief discussion before we started this segment, Jason's going, I'm not sure he did that one. So I'm going to say, of course, of course, Shadow of the Beast 1 and 2.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But
to
be honest, to be honest, back in the day, I didn't know who did the cover art. I didn't know who the programmers were, who the sound designers were. I just knew there was a game out. I liked the game or I didn't like the game. But it's retrospectively now that I'm learning about that. And yeah, it's a standout. Shadow of the Beast 1 and 2. Everybody talks about that. Fantastic cover art. Yeah.
Martin Clems. What an embarrassment I am.
Was it?
Not Roger Dean. Martin Clems who did my favourite Roger Dean artwork.
Who did pteropods?
I haven't Googled that one.
Yeah, that's in the interview. He does say who did the color on that. I think it was that Dean did the sketch, and then somebody else colored Pteropods.
Right.
But he did do the logo. So Dean's fingerprints are in there. Yeah, I didn't personally become a serious Yes fan until the mid 1990s. So by that point, Roger Dean hadn't done much for the band since their 1980 release Drama. Because anytime the band wanted to establish, we're back and we're the band you remember, they'd phone up Dean. His Drama cover attempted to do that after they'd done a couple of photographic covers, and there was also a major change in the band's lineup. And then when Yes tried to reform around their 1970s core in 1996, they again called him up and leaned on him for several releases. So I do remember, as I started seeing some of the classic Dean covers and then some of his 90s stuff, like I don't know that I immediately said, oh, that looks like the cover of Chrono Quest, the game that was so boring that the computer store also gave it to me for free when I got my Amiga 500. There it is. Thank you, Dave. Because like that is absolutely a Yes cover right there. Like there's no getting around that once you know Chrono Quest.
I don't know if he did the second one or not. It doesn't look like him.
Doesn't look like, okay. I think he might have, but yeah, at some point I gradually became aware that all of this was coming from the same wellspring. They do talk about some of Dean's best known covers, including obviously both of the Shadow of the Beast games as well as Barbarian, and the transition that he made from being the frontline artist to just providing the Psygnosis logo, maybe some game logos, inspirational guidance on later titles. Yeah, Dave.
Not the same Barbarian we talked about earlier, because there are two Barbarians. So Barbarian, the CPC is a different, that's Palace Barbarian compared to this, which is Psygnosis Barbarian.
Yes. This is the one without Maria Whittaker.
Yes.
Loose trademark controls on the concept of barbarism.
Also, Barbarian, Palace Barbarian doesn't have Maria Whittaker in it either, other than the cover.
Correct. Well, it has a princess that you do rescue at the end, but yeah.
It has a little goblin that kicks the head off.
Yes, kicks the head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where the interview also is relevant to us and topics that we cover here on This Week in Retro, it talks about the strong parallels between big box computer games and classic vinyl albums, which of course are, they're a square foot. They're 1 foot square on each side, and the prospect of gatefolding out to become an even bigger piece of art, as close to the edge is here. Quote to Dean, "It looked and felt like something you would both like to give and receive, and that concept of the gift was really strong. And so it was with albums, and so it was with games." And this actually tied in with another post we had on the subreddit this week, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, a post from Fourth Directive, who lamented the challenges in just trying to walk into a game shop and walk out with a contemporary game. Because his post included a photo of a rack that appeared to just be empty DVD-style cases that were just taking up shelf space as an advertisement to pre-order the game online. So, did you guys have any thoughts on just how hard it is, even if you want to pick up a box game?
Oh, it's gone now. We're long past the age of that. Even if you get a game and there's a DVD inside it, then it's not even likely to work without connecting online and doing the initial patches. So it's definitely gone. But big box games, I think there's a point at which the box becomes too small to be proper artwork. So we've got a vinyl album. And I love my vinyl albums for this. They're lovely and big, but you don't need it to be quite that big to still be a beautiful thing. Like these big box games are big enough, and even smaller box games are probably slightly big enough. But when you get to a DVD keep case, which is the plastic DVD covers we've had for the past 25 years or something, when you get to those, I think it's then gone past the point at which it's a nice object to hold and look at. And I think once we stopped having boxes that size, once we dropped big box games, we stopped having boxes that were nice to pick up and look at. And that's the point at which, for me, that it all ended.
Yeah, I'd agree. Well, maybe, a DVD case frontage is about the same size as a VHS, which is why he stayed with that long form. But you could also get down to, like, say, the PlayStation 1 games, which were more CD size. That's even smaller. That's even smaller, right? So I think maybe the DVD case is, you're right. I think it's still acceptable in that size. Any smaller than that, it's a no-go. It's a no-go.
Yeah. And the evolution of packaging, because it's similar in size to the packaging of the media it's replacing, that's a whole other story. CD long boxes and all that, because it fit in the vinyl display racks. But yeah, cover art obviously mattered at some point. Well, not to Dave, but it mattered to some people, because just as music buyers...
Didn't get the opportunity to matter.
Yeah, because just as music buyers would, judge an album in part by its cover, faced with a lot of choice on the shelf, the presence on the computer game rack of a swashbuckling hero or a fetching maiden, Maria Whittaker already name checked, or a pleasantly distorted, lushly colored Roger Dean landscape that might draw us in for a second look. And, it would be a mistake to think about the importance of cover art and game packaging as like a linear relationship over time, as though it was really, really important, and then it's just kind of fallen off and boxes kept getting smaller and art got less important. Like publishers like Psygnosis very obviously said, we're going to hit the market, we're going to make serious investments in style and vibe that others were cutting corners on. Maybe they'd just do a photo shoot, and that's not free, but it's definitely less than somebody painting something up for weeks and weeks on end. In the early days of game publishing, there was seemingly very little discipline even within organizations. Infamously, companies like Avalon Hill, which was an early prolific publisher of software in the late 70s and early 80s, they had lots and lots of experience shipping product at retail, knowing that shelf appeal mattered. And they gave us the childishly hideous Space Station Zulu cover in 1982, even though most of their games up to that point looked halfway decent. Infocom, generally regarded as one of the best of the 1980s at appealing and interesting packaging, they put out a couple of stinkers, including the absolutely muddy mess that was Suspect. And if you recall last week's Jordan Mechner story, again, he notes that Prince of Persia didn't really catch fire in stores until it was reissued in that, irregular oblong hourglass type box. That's right, because box sizes fluctuated over time as well. It didn't just all start huge and winnow down to digital wallets and license codes in a straight line. EA had their vinyl record style. Atari and Avalon Hill did favor really massive boxes. And then things kind of started getting standardized in the late 1980s, but then that competition in box size and shape kicked off, fueled in no small part by the success of that Prince of Persia reissue. And I knew somebody at the time that worked at a Software Etc. location and recalled that those weirdo, oversized, hexagonal, round, other oddly shaped boxes became more trendy in the 1990s, that they would struggle to make them fit in all of their usual shelf spaces. So from Roger Dean, we got to, hexagonal boxes like Centauri Alliance and stuff like that. But guys, what have I overlooked in your career experience here?
Well, as I hinted earlier, I was a big dirty pirate. I certainly made up for it now by buying everything I ever had, more or less. I mean, you can see there's walls of stuff around me. And I really do appreciate box art now, especially stuff that isn't computer generated. And I can't tell you why I prefer that, but there's really something amazing about box art where it's been done by hand. Can't tell you why. And I love fantasy art, so the stuff that you see in D&D manuals, and some of that made it across. Jeff Easley's famous cover for Eye of the Beholder, although he did it for something else, and they just licensed that image out for it. And the same with Larry Elmore for Secret of the Silver Blades. Lots of stuff like that on the SSI stuff. The fantasy style art there. And I also like the kind of the pulpy or post-pulpy sci-fi style covers, the ones that not so much time went into, but they managed to do something amazing with it. The kind of the old sci-fi novels from New Age sci-fi in the 60s and 70s. If you get the old covers, not the re-release covers from the 90s and so on, there's a real appeal to those kind of simple images that aren't, there's lots of flaws with them, but there's something about them. And there's not very many games that have that. I mean, I remember Star-Lord from Microprose has a kind of a sci-fi novel kind of cover, although it's maybe a little bit too good for that. And the one I really like is Star Command from SSI, which has this. I mean, that's really 50s kind of sci-fi. The kind of the soldiers on it and the nasty looking arachnid aliens on it. I think that's amazing. But my favourite of all time is Steiner Loon's Driller for the Amstrad CPC. Driller was made in Freescape, the 3D engine made for the Amstrad CPC and ported across elsewhere. He did do lots of other art, and I found out when I did a little bit of Googling, he did the cover for Jeff Minter's Sheep in Space.
Nobody's
budget
perfect.
games.
I said nobody's perfect.
Yeah, well, it's a bit unusual, that one. Budget games, budget tapes had some quite interesting stuff, and they were a little bit like those old sci-fi novels. But again, they're so small, you didn't really appreciate the art the same way. But I want to finish by talking about my favourite phrase about box art, and it's imagination gap. And the wonderful thing they do of helping our imagination turn a limited amount of pixels into a story, an adventure, and a world in our head. And even for me, if that was a loading screen, then it did the job as well.
And funnily enough, that's where I've always had a slight issue with the Roger Dean artwork on Shadow of the Beast 1 and 2, because it's not immediately obvious how that connects into the world you're thrown into when you first start playing the game, right? It's like, this is nothing like what's on the box. It never worried me because that game always sold itself on the graphics you saw being demoed in the shop, right? So you knew what you were getting. But yeah, there's almost like this, disconnect between the artwork and the game itself, which I find quite interesting. One of the artists we haven't mentioned is Bob Wakelin. So he did things like Whizball, which is quite a good one.
Oh, I love Whizball, yeah.
Yeah, Whizball. That's a double dual cassette that I've got there. Target Renegade, I believe that's one of his as well. And two big box games I've got here. Epic, which is sort of sci-fi, typical stuff with the pilot front and center.
Yeah, that is a sci-fi cover.
Yeah.
That's a sci-fi novel cover.
And sort of, some of the enemies in the background and stuff. And he reminds me of, if anybody's a Farscape fan out there, reminds me of John Crichton. Yeah, right? That's John Crichton right there.
Yeah.
Now, we're currently rewatching all of Farscape at the moment. That's what we're binge watching.
How's it hold up?
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. It's not too bad, even though it's got Muppets in it, right? And
Years since I've seen it.
And Space Gun, that's another one of his, I believe. And that's a name I got to know. Again, I didn't know these names back in the day, but one of my favorite YouTubers out there, so I'll give him a shout out and link in the show notes. Dave, Retro Games Played Badly. Not this Dave, another Dave. But yeah, he's
I do
really,
play games badly.
Yeah, but he's really into his Bob Wakelin cover art, and I believe he's trying to collect every single piece that he did. So yeah, really, really cool stuff. Yeah. You mentioned briefly, Jason, bad artwork, and my favorite example is, and it's a silly little Electron game that I ended up buying as a kid because you couldn't get Uridium on the Electron, and it's a game called Psychastria. Okay, and I have to thank Rich, who sent me this was the copy I had as a kid, and he found the exact version, because I bought a copy on eBay, and when it arrived, it didn't have this cover art, and that's part of the nostalgic experience, right? It's got to be the right cover art. And the version, I'll get a photo to Duncan so he can drop it in the YouTube version. But basically, it's just this really badly drawn green alien head. And being familiar with the game, it has no resemblance to what you come across in the game whatsoever. You're flying a spaceship in the game, terrible. Right? And they've just swapped out the cover art to something that is just hideous and looks like it's been stolen off a packet of, edible Space Invaders or Monster Munch or something. So yeah, crazy.
Yeah, the wild thing about Dean's long career is that if you look at his album covers from the last 25 or so years, you start to say, oh, is that a Psygnosis game? Oh, no, that's a Yes album from 1999. So just a really storied career, and he does have a gallery site out there. Today, of course, there are more games released than ever before, but things are much less about a box cover or even a box cover replacement, more about, logos that will fit in a banner ad anywhere you might want to show it. Trailers, which may or may not really reflect gameplay. Any impression you can make in a split second, fade in, fade out, shadowy view on a game store site, those things matter a lot more. And that's not to say that there's no room for somebody with Roger Dean's talent and creativity, but back in the 1980s, he was working with extremely long lead times. You'll be unsurprised, Chris, to your point about Shadow of the Beast, like, does this look like the game? He frequently didn't see real game art or even a completed game design document before he had to get to work because, color separation and printing and all that took so much longer back then. And also today, it's very easy to go out to the global marketplace and say, I'm looking for somebody who can do more or less Roger Dean style work, but at a fraction of Roger Dean style prices, and find somebody who will do it one way or another. Dean was also very negative on what the compact disc did to album art, and we've kind of talked about that, shrinking below the size that it's still cool. And I think there were certainly some compensations in getting down to that format. Obviously, the trend has not been the friend for those of us who do dig the lush, contrastful landscapes. Definitely recommend reading the interviews. It's a really interesting dive into a niche part of his career, stopping by that gallery site, rogerdean.com. And I mean, Dave already hit us with the Yes lyrics, so I hope everybody's pleased that I didn't uncork any of my own John Anderson style lyrics. Although I have been known to do a little Asia for karaoke. So maybe if we get together in an event sometime, I'll try that out.
What's going on with patrons, Jason?
There's a lot of them. There's a lot of new patrons this week. So thank you very much for signing up. We can go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro if you would like to join the many. I think we can take turns. Thank you, Tim, for coming on.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Fergus.
Thank you, Pete.
And then Paul came back after a brief interregnum, which involved resetting his iPad, but he was kind enough to drop us a note to explain what happened. So welcome back, Paul, and sorry about the trouble with the iPad.
And I got a message through just before we started from Alan at Midnight Brew. They do every year they do a release of Spectrum games, and they put them in cassette tapes. So if you want a new made cassette game for the Spectrum and you want to be able to hold it in your hand properly, then Midnight Brew Collection for 2025 is now on sale, but won't be officially announced until tomorrow. So, of course, the time this goes to air, it will be officially available. So you can grab this year's edition before everyone else, and if you want to, you can pick it up at Crash 2025. On to news in brief, and Dr. Local tells us that Windows 7 market share skyrocketed last month as users refused to move to Windows 11. And I remember this being said about Windows 7, people refusing to move to Windows 7. And I think there might be a little bit of hyperbole there, but according to the Windows Central article, it has moved up. There may be a data glitch there, but it has moved up. But people upvoting this and submitting it to our subreddit, does that mean that Windows 7 is retro? Surely not. Windows 7 is retro. That just makes me feel old. Windows 7 is modern, surely.
Sure. XP, maybe. XP, I'm not even sure, really.
Windows 98,
it's old.
yeah.
It's old.
Yeah, it's old. How? Yeah. Anyway, another story. Pajako links us to a Verge article that confirms that the Lego Game Boy has, of course, already been modded to play games for real. Just be careful you don't brick it.
Zing. And Duke Nukem 3D is being turned into a voxel game. There is no release date yet stated. Voxels mean that they're going to replace all of the 2D sprites. Remember, Duke 3D really was a 2D sprite game at its core. Into 3D, the voxels are volumetric pixels. And I'm told that when this was done for Doom a few years back, it looked amazing. There's also a demo of a Wolf 3D Voxelstein, or Voxelstein, if you're Dave. So thank you for Lord Borak for linking us to the time extension video on the work being done.
Antiques for Geeks links us to a Rob Smith video on high-density discs for the Amiga and how they hacked all that to work. I bet you had that, Jason.
I did, and I mean, I'm sure it's a fine video. The answer is it worked very slowly because I'm sure everybody blamed marketing for the poor bandwidth of the Amiga I/O chips that nobody ever did anything about. But yeah, no, it was a real costly and time consuming struggle to do high density on the Amiga, but it could be done. And when you play Mortal Kombat and you get that toasty pop-up guy, you might be surprised to hear that that's audio director Dan Forden, and he's been there working on that game series until very recently. He left the studio earlier this month after working on every version of Mortal Kombat from 1992 onwards. Thank you of Christoph. Why do you?
Turns out people aren't just going back to Windows 7. That's an anti-scammer channel. Kit Bogger has gone back to Windows 3.11 to mess with scammers. So thanks, Hack Build Restore. Know about that.
And there's loads more in the subreddit. If you'd like to go with the subreddit and review what people have submitted, submit your own articles, have a chat in the comments, then go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
Roasted tinted glasses are a funny thing. The 80s and our childhoods were awesome and full of hope, and everything was bright colours and awesome music and Roger Dean artwork. Forgetting, of course, the pressures of homework looming over your head, the school bully looking to improve your looks with his fist, the fumes from leaded fuel filling our lungs, along with passive smoking at the cafe, never mind the pub, and of course the fact that we were most certainly about to be nuked at any time every single day. And what was also awesome back then was the affordability of our hobby, computers and gaming. A Spectrum for only £100 or a C64 for a few quid more. What amazing times. So why then was it so hard to save up for these items? Well, because our memory lies and they weren't affordable, and it's only when we adjust for inflation that we get the full picture. So Kimodo shared with us on the subreddit an awesome image that puts it all into perspective. It's basically a page from the UK electronics retailer Dixon's, from one of their catalogues. It's from 1985, and it's showing things like the Acorn Electron, the C16, the Spectrum Plus, and even the Sinclair QL. It's full of nostalgic dot-pointed detail and images, black and white images that make looking back at these catalogues so much fun. But this one isn't as much fun because the prices have been adjusted for inflation. And guess what? It's not cheap. So we're going to have a look, and I'm going to talk you around the page, okay? That's how we're going to do this. And we can discuss if this is what you're expecting at all, right? So basically the Acorn Electron, for starters, you got your 32K of RAM, program with BBC Basic. What does it come with? Does it come with a 5-game software pack? Does it come with that? Yeah, that's free. Yep. It comes with a data recorder. And it comes with, obviously, your introductory cassette and all of that stuff. And the price, adjusted for inflation, if you were to buy that in 2025, it's £310, right? Well, £311, in fact. So just to quickly fly around the page, you've also got the Spectrum Plus. That comes with similar stuff, including a joystick, 10-pack of software, blah, blah, blah. So for a Spectrum Plus, £436. It's not as cheap as we remember it, is it? C16, £215, and Sinclair QL that's on the page as well, £626. Dave?
That Acorn Electron price sensation at £310, that's not the right price for the Electron. That's them having accepted it's failed as a platform and clearing them out, isn't it?
I think you're right, actually, because this is 1985. So this is the adjusted price for their bargain bin basement price.
Yeah, this is the
right.
Everyone knows that you're not going to get many games for this price for it because it's cheaper than a Spectrum Plus.
There's only 4 games and they're all on the bottom shelf in boots. Right, that's how it was, right?
Poor old Electron.
Yeah, so I guess the Spectrum Plus and the Spectrum QL are the ones to really hone in on there. Then, so that's $625 for the QL. 625 quid.
£435 for the Spectrum, which was supposed to be the everyman of computers, the really kind of just go and buy one. £400 that isn't just go and buy one.
I mean, it does come with a free data recorder, but
and a joystick, and 10 games.
A Spectra video joystick, which looks very suspiciously like an Amstrad CPC joystick. I wonder if that's who Alan Sugar got to make a joystick and said, make sure it's all plastic, no metal in this.
No, wait, this gets better. So looking at the Spectrum Plus, okay, it's got the 10-pack of Sinclair software, right? Titles include, keep in mind, this is 1985. This is quite far into the Spectrum's life, right? Titles include Checkered Flag, Scrabble, Chess. And if you look at the artwork, you've got a couple of Horace titles in there as well, I can see. It's a grainy black and white image, but I can certainly make out Horace. So probably, let's say Horace Goes Skiing, and I don't know what the other one is. These are not AAA titles at this point in the Spectrum lineup at all. And they're certainly not making use of the 128K and the additional sound chip, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
interesting.
And Chris, were you following discussion on, I think it was both on the subreddit and YouTube, about your story from last week about the Pi 500 Plus, where a lot of people have chimed in and said, for $200, you can get a real computer, which, I mean, is true. It's amazing how much more computer you can get for $200 in $2025, which again, divide by 3 at least to convert that to 40 years ago. And people are scoffing, saying like, yeah, as much as the 500 Plus is an improvement over the previous gen, like, no, you can actually get a lot more computer for that money, that paltry amount of money today.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the 500 plus, when you think about it, you're getting a mechanical keyboard and they're not necessarily cheap.
And I'm going to come back to this mechanical keyboard thing a little bit later in your story, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Anything else before we move on from that page that jumps out at you?
I mean, it to me, it wasn't shocking because, I was aware of just how much more expensive these are, but it really does put in perspective against, coincidentally, the discussion from last week that, yes, for what is today far less than $100 US, in 1985 terms, people are scoffing and saying, like, I can get far more for this. Whereas for a massive multiplier of that, what is the best value on this page? I guess it's the Spectrum Plus, I guess. Yeah. And that's crazy expensive for Spectrum hardware. Come on.
Yeah. It's a shame. It's a shame they didn't pick a page with the Commodore 64 and the Amstrad on it as well as the Spectrum. The kind of or maybe even, you wouldn't get it in 1985. The ST and Amiga wouldn't be advertised yet in 1985. You can buy them, but I don't think they'd be. I don't know that they'd be in Dixon's yet.
No,
but yeah.
Well, funnily enough, that's where the comments on this went in the Reddit. So some of the comments on the Reddit page were things like, it's realizing that the £399 Amiga 500 in 1989 would be priced at over £1,000 today. That was by Antiques for Geeks. And in response to that comment, you've got somebody else says, my BBC Model B was £399 in 1983. And the floppy disk interface and the 5.25-inch disk drive I got in 1985 added another £300. And that was by EV Mad. Yeah.
So you're looking at £2,000 for your BBC setup.
That's insane.
Money. And just, incredible. I mean, that would put it way out the way of what people would buy, and it would stop it being adopted. Yeah. I don't think we quite appreciate how prices have come down.
No, that's right. So for me, that really helped put our current hobby into perspective. Okay, so I was not lucky enough to jump on this bandwagon when Amigas were being thrown out or picked up for a tenner at car boot sales. It's not entirely true. I did get given one. That's another story that I think I've owned up to before it ended up in the tip. Anyway, moving on. So when I got into this as a hobby, my boxed Batman pack, which does present as brand new, right, or pretty much close to, that was purchased in late 2018, and it cost me the original recommended retail price of £399. But that's actually a bargain because, today's recommended retail price would be twice that for a brand new A500. Sure, my A1200 cost me a little more than that. That was unboxed, but that's modded and it's got some decent fruit. So my Acorn Electron and my Plus 3, they pretty much cost peanuts, as did many of the other items I've collected, including my boxed Atari 2600 Vader, which is in pretty much as new condition and should, if we just go by it's a new machine and it's, inflated prices, that would cost me around $400 US. And I got that for around $122 US not that long ago. So if it's now helping me, if I look at it in those terms, it kind of starts to justify it a little bit. It's pretty cool. So guys, did you jump on in the expensive end of this hobby? And let's include modern era re-releases in this as we discuss the prices, things like the Next and that kind of thing in this conversation. Does this make you guys feel better about the current market and what you pay for the gear? Jason?
Yeah, I'll talk about the Next first, because that is one that I bought, and yeah, it's not cheap compared to I could buy multiple Pi 500 pluses for that, or as people point out, a real mini PC or whatever. But I bought that because I saw it as not as a way to buy an expensive Spectrum, although it is, but it's me hoping that this is my one big general purpose FPGA computer purchase, and I can hang with all the people that have Spectrum Nexts and kind of keep up with that. So that was kind of call it an investment, not a good investment, but an investment on that front. But I do want to come back to thinking about the QL, thinking about what I teed up with that mechanical keyboard thing. Like, what this does help frame up is that disillusionment dip in the curve of early 16 and 32-bit computers. It really is obvious when you look at that. Consumers got a massive price hike in exchange for questionably useful features. And that was across the board at pretty much any platform you would care to name. We didn't all need MIDI. We didn't all care about, that you can easily hook a Genlock up to this. We certainly didn't all want to use a tiny black and white screen. And I would point to, they all had that obvious flaw. Engineers at this time, they all like to blame marketing and management, but these guys were obsessed with putting niche features in that statistically nobody cared about. Multiple onboard processors. And you can talk about the tube in the BBC all day long and management. It was over-engineered. It made things insanely complicated. And ultimately these things didn't matter. And they would obsess about how many registers does the CPU we're going to use, which doesn't matter if you're not programming in raw assembly. It does not matter. And the Pi 500 Plus having that mechanical keyboard, I know that causes a rush of blood to certain extremities in a certain number of people, but I think that's pretty clearly a thing that's adding a lot of cost to that machine. And most people are like, I don't care. I'm going to hook up a wireless keyboard. I'm going to hook up my favorite, whatever. And I think that's pretty clearly what's happening in there as well. As a collector or aggregator, whatever you want to call me, I have mostly stayed away from hardware acquisition now that it's become so crazy expensive. I had enough disposable income in the 90s and early 2000s that I was able to pick up some interesting stuff. I got a few Atari 8-bits and even an ST setup for, on average, $50 to $75 per piece. Easy to say. I wish I'd picked up a couple more. And Atari 800 XL is kind of my one. I wish I'd picked up one of those. But I'm fine not paying anywhere near what the prices are today, whether it's inflation adjusted for the original days or not. My one regret, maybe, I've had a couple of Amiga 500s in my life, which have then left my life. At some point, it would have been nice to pick one up to replace it, but I can live without at contemporary prices.
Lots of stuff I've done quite well on eBay, but nothing like the 2005 car boot sale price. I think if you had any premonition about how things would go, then you could have got a lot of stuff for a deal. However, I still don't think retro is that expensive. If you're talking about spending 50 or 100 quid on something and someone has to go the effort of packing it up and making sure it works and sending it to you, it's not yet at the point. I mean, people talk about cash in the attic and all this money and so on. Unless you go into your attic and find an Amiga 4000, which you're not going to do, statistically speaking, you're going to find a grotty old 500 plus with the PCB in an advanced state of decay. You're not going to find expensive stuff there. It's not that expensive still. It's only if you're looking at getting lots of stuff. If you want one retro machine, then you're not talking about spending a lot of money really on getting it. And I think the grumbling with prices is that we've nearly all lived through a period where these old machines were literally junk. My dad took all of mine to the local dump. At the time, I didn't care. And we've had that 15-year period from the end of the 90s till about 2010, where all this was just not worth people's effort to go selling. You could get it all at car boot sales for next to nothing. But now it costs a little more, and people I think are a bit resentful about that, and they grudge the price of it. But if you compare something like a Mister to a modern purchase, so a C64U or the Spectrum next door, the Mister, they're not going to be like a graphics card that you buy for £300 now that's worth £200 next year and £150 in 2 years after that. And before you know it, it's obsolete. You need to replace it. These things won't go obsolete. They'll still work forever. So at least that's going about them. The Mister I bought years ago and then upgraded to the Mister Multi-System. And the Mister Multi-System, there's no reason to upgrade. It'll do what I want forever. I mean, the arcade games that it plays are not going to get updates. Gauntlet 2 isn't going to need a new processor. Golden Axe is going to work fine on it. So at least with this, it's the kind of tech you can buy that isn't going to need to replace in 3 or 4 years' time.
That's true. That's a fair point. And interestingly on that, the new release stuff at FPGA, another video I watched this week was the edited version of Amiga Bill's stream, where he did a live hands-on demo of Apollo's controversial A6000 machine. And I have to say, it actually looks stunning, and his feedback, obviously I wasn't able to touch it, just watching through the screen, but his feedback, and Amiga Bill is somebody who I trust, on the 3D printed case was actually really positive. It's well worth a watch. I'll put a link in the show notes. But you can't get away from that price of €1,000, right? I want one. I actually want. I think they look great. Black and red would be a fantastic color choice, or the grey and red. I'd be happy with either of those two combos, but not at that price. That's $2,000 Australian for me, and I'd be better off getting myself some brand new keycaps and a new case for my existing A1200 and an 060 accelerator to replace my 030 for my existing kit, and I'd still be quids in. So that might be a better plan for me.
I will say slightly in their defense, they're really talking about small volumes of products, 100%. So that's why the price goes up. If they were to somehow, if there was going to be an FPGA Amiga in the same way that the Commodore 64 from Periphractic is doing, where they combine a keyboard, a PCB, and a case all in one for the mass market, or mass market as far as it goes for us, they could bring the price right down on that, and you would maybe be able to buy it for maybe £400. And at £400, I think it becomes an awful lot more attractive.
That would be a nice price. Yeah. But my closing point here, even at the price that it is, in keeping with this conversation, adjusting for inflation, their price is actually pretty much spot on for what you would pay for a brand new Amiga model in 2025.
On now to the community question of the week, where we asked you last time around, do you miss your wedge computer? Would you go back to wedge top computing if you could? Would somebody who is in old Reddit mode please take us out of contest mode? Fun fact, not a feature they put in their new interface.
It's already out. I took it out 5 minutes ago. That's how good I am at this show now.
Amazing.
Fantastic. I'll go with the top one if you want. So Biscuit says, I do miss my wedge computer, but the form factor is the least of the reasons why. Okay.
Alan P. Thorpe says, not really. I more miss the box computer with a monitor on top and the separate keyboard like the Mega STE that I had. It was convenient, it looked good, and it raised the monitor nicely. While I love the look of the ST after recently buying one again, I found it too big and cumbersome to use regularly. And that's a good point. If unless you've got a dedicated place to set it up, and who has that? Well, I do, but yeah, it's difficult to say. If you at least get a dedicated place to set it up, then taking it out and connecting it up and putting it away, it's just too bulky for that.
And Weeping Scorpion wrote this one just for me. I'm going to read it as written out. I do miss using the C12D8, which with 108 and 20 kilobytes could have had a Prince of Persia port. And I do lament not being able to set up my Amiga 500 and Atari 1040 STF next to each other, showing off probably the three nicest wedges, though the Sinclair PC200 has to get an honorable mention. That all said, I don't think I will go back, but I also won't rule it out completely. And then, yes, there's a lot of discussion that followed about the PC200. So maybe you can still jump in on that, Dave.
Yeah, the PC200, it looks absolutely gorgeous. It's the Sinclair one. It's not a particularly great machine. And as a PC in a wedge form factor, you miss out on the whole point of PCs being able to configure the hardware, but it looks absolutely amazing.
Is that the one where it looks like Sinclair just bought an Amiga 500 and painted it Sinclair colours? Is that the machine you're talking about?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. Someone has pointed out to Duncan that it's episode 238, not 328, and Duncan's put his post on it, says it's episode 238, not 328. Sorry, on Reddit you can't edit the title of a submission. But Various Hunt, the reason I mentioned it is Various Hunt's reply, and he says, we're trying to catch up with the retro hour.
Yeah, no fair us jumping 90 episodes at a time just to keep
that Various Hunt guy. He's a funny guy.
So yeah, lots of different comments there. If you'd like to go and read more, there are lots of different comments there. Someone mentioned the grass is always greener, and that's a good point. On to this week's question of the week. Jason, what is the question of the week for this week?
So Chris talked about all those great free chess and Horus games and the data quarters you could get with your 1985 Spectrum and Electron packs. So what's the best free pack-in you've ever picked up with the system, whether you bought it used or you got it new, fresh in the shrink wrap?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. So what came with it? Whether we're talking about pack-in games.
I got the terrible Chrono Quest. Some got Spectrum chess. So yeah, what's your favorite free pack-in of all time?
Fantastic. And that's us. That's us finished. So we will see you next week for more of last week's news next week. I'm waving.
Bye.
Chris is waving. Jason's waving. Bye-bye.
That's it. Bye.
Bye.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.